So I ran across this article from Politico, and it struck my interest. Most Republicans support declaring the United States a Christian nation. I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And that word declaring kind of jumped out at me. And so if you read the article and you're on the conservative side, you'll probably be irritated in a little few things in there. But what really struck my attention is they highlighted 2 questions out of a survey or a poll that they did recently. And so it really surprised me. And so here's the questions. Here are the 2 questions. And so I'm going to tell you guys what the questions are, and I want you to answer it to yourself, okay?
Out loud.
Out loud, yes, so we can hear it. Okay, so the first one is, do you think the U.S. Constitution would or would not allow the U.S. government to declare the United States a Christian nation? Okay? It's not a trick question, but what do you think on that one? Do you think the U.S. Constitution would or would not allow the U.S. government to declare the United States a Christian nation? The second question within this greater poll, this greater survey, is would you favor or oppose the United States officially declaring the United States to be a Christian nation? So when I first saw this article, I was like, I want to see the question, because sometimes, polls will give a question and they'll word it in such a way to make it confusing. Well, this one seems pretty clear. And so here we go. So with the first question, do you think the U.S. Constitution would or would not allow the U.S. government to declare the United States a Christian nation? The article is really about what Republicans, how they replied to it. And 43% said would allow, and 57% of Republicans said would not allow. Okay, you guys have already seen the article and everything. What was your reaction? Were you surprised? Does that sound about right? What were your thoughts?
I honestly thought it would be higher.
Higher
On
would
the
allow?
would allow.
Really?
Agreed.
Yeah, I feel like it would be, considering the culture of the political culture of our nation right now is very divided upon that issue right now, especially between Republicans and Democrats and independents. I feel like it's very weighted. But I am surprised that there are 57% that would say would not allow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Question number 2. Would you favor or oppose the United States officially declaring the United States to be a Christian nation? So for Republicans, 61% said favor and 39% oppose.
Yeah, I actually did think more people would favor that.
Okay.
I don't know.
So you guys are not shocked by this.
I'm not
not
terribly
shocking.
shocked.
Probably at face value, when you listen to this, you're probably thinking, okay, not that big of a deal. But I think that the opening question, the question that I posed was, do you support declaring the United States as a Christian nation, right? And so to me, it's declaring. It's that word declaring, right? Do you support declaring the United States a Christian nation? Well,
my question, out of maybe just ignorance here, what would be the benefit? Like, what is the purpose of that?
I mean, as a Christian, as a right wing, born again, white Christian, I don't see a whole lot of benefit for that.
Yeah.
The only thing for me would be is if it's something that you declare, then that would be your motivating reason behind a lot of choices you make for your nation.
Yeah.
But if those two aren't connected, then like you're saying, what is the point? If that's not going to be, how we decide, what we do and how our leaders decide how they're going to lead, then there is no point. We obviously are not gaining favor as believers by doing something like that.
In my mind, I'm just like, man, look at American history. Do we really want to declare our nation a Christian nation, and what does that actually mean? You have the very first amendment, and I had to look it up and just see the wording of it. Congress shall not allow respecting an establishment of religion. Why would we want to, as Christians, why would we want to do that, especially when our history and our heritage were the ones that defended the freedom of religion? You know what I mean? I mean, there are plenty of things that we can say that maybe we're not always proud of when it comes to being a Baptist. You know what I mean? Our heritage is kind of mixed in a lot of ways, you know. But man, when I read about our history as Baptists and our early history, I was proud. I mean, we had pastors and individuals that really fought for the freedom of religion and saw the wisdom of that. So I was shocked, to be honest, when I saw the results of this poll, thinking, "Holy cow!" And I know it wasn't just Baptists that were on here. It was, you know, a lot of different kind of Christians, a lot of different type of Republicans. But I was like, wow. I'm wondering if people really thought through what the implications of that would be, right? So if we're going to be having a state endorsed religion, that's what they had in Europe. That's what many of them were fleeing from, right?
I was going to say, if you look at the history of us as people coming from.
Yeah. If you weren't Catholic, then you were taxed.
Yeah.
You were taxed because you weren't Catholic.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, you know, my thought process is to think about how I would respond. And like, I don't believe the Constitution would allow us to declare that because, like you said, the amendment is based on the freedom of religion. Whether we like it or not, the Constitution clearly states it's on freedom of religion. And there's always that debate about, well, what does that mean? Because, you know, our founding fathers were Christian, yada, 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 whatever, you know, but the point is the way the Constitution is written does not allow that. But then on the flip side, I understand an older generation more adamantly and vehemently declaring, yes, we're a Christian nation, because in my lifetime, and I'm not that old as compared to him who's 70.
And Alan
who's 60. But like,
I'm not 60.
You know,
yet.
I can tell you in my lifetime, we've had such a culture shift.
We've had
such a culture shift in the last 20, 25 years. Like since you guys have been born, we've had such a culture shift in how our culture and how our nation behaves and acts and the things we believe in and the things we support and the things that, you know, I mean, and it's more than 20 years, but like I can see it. Like I can see the shift in our culture from when I was little to now.
Absolutely.
And so I totally get why an older generation would stick to, we're a Christian nation. You know, 50 years ago, more people went to church and it was normal. And, you know, it was people believed in the Bible and believed in God and had the fear of the Lord and all that kind of stuff. But as time has gone on, a younger generation sees a very different world and a very different America, United States.
And I think that's probably why an older generation would be like, I would be all about declaring us as a Christian nation because then, you know, it probably would influence our laws. It would influence things, you know.
But like Ali said, if they're not directly connected, then I would be against it because I wouldn't want the United States to represent Christ.
No.
As it is, I would not want the United States to represent Christ.
And so I started writing down, how could you ask this differently? Like, was the United States founded as a Christian nation? Well, kind of yes and no. But I think the answer is for sure that our Constitution, it oozes, you know, the principles and values that come out of the Bible and out of more of a Judeo-Christian worldview. That is for sure. I mean, you just read, you know, you read our founding documents and they go directly to a creator, right? To a God. So I would personally say, no, we were not founded as a Christian nation, but our Constitution radiates truth, principles, and values, deeply influenced where you can't even separate the two in a lot of ways. We're so, and I think that's why some people are trying to undercut the Constitution because it would be great to be able to probably rewrite some of that out of there, you know, to be honest.
Well, if you do that once, then the whole Constitution is moot.
Well, I mean, even our founders are saying that our Constitution, the success of it is based on the fact that we truly are a majority of Christians living out our faith the way that it's taught, right? That we have those values. And so we're seeing this struggle now because, you know, some of the other polls that we've talked about is that we're moving away from being a Christian nation. So
knowing who they were, you know, just knowing a little bit of the history behind who the founding fathers, as we call them, were when they wrote the Constitution, it makes me want to go back and be like you said, it's so clear to anybody who's really a Bible believer that the wording, the terminologies, the things that are in it are foundational principles found in the Bible. But it would have made our country and world so much better had they actually said that, had they actually pointed to that directly and said, whatever, you know, but I think it was part of that. I mean, speculation, right? I wasn't around when this happened. Is it because they were fighting against the religious tyranny in England that they didn't want to then turn it back to what seemed like a religious tyranny when they wrote our Constitution. But here we are hundreds of years later struggling with the identity and definition of it.
You're looking at the gospel and the fact that God wants a relationship with you. Mm-hmm. It's not a forced thing. And we all agree that, you know,
Right.
and forcing someone to abide by a biblical law, where we can get into this idea of morality. Where does it come from? Does it come from God, which we believe it does? It's instilled in everybody, this morality of a biblical morality. But even so, like, I have a hard time reconciling this fact that if we would name ourselves a Christian nation, isn't that against what the gospel is wanting? Like, how is what the gospel is preaching, that God wants you to have a relationship with him, not a forced relationship with him, and he wants you to choose him.
It's interesting because I do think there's like a massive cultural shift, right? But there's also part of me that thinks your great grandpa probably thought the same thing of your dad's generation. Oh, they're so far from Christ, you know? And so I think it's cyclical. Like, we're always going to be in this, it's going to ebb and its flow and all of that. But the way that we love people, I think, looks a lot different today than it did during the time of our founding fathers. So, you know, loving during that time might have meant like, okay, you cannot, like, we are going to almost force you into this because this is what's good and right for you. Yeah. Whereas like us now, we're a little more, well, a lot more open and like, hey, you don't look like anything that what we believe. You don't act like any of that, but we're still going to let you come in because that's where we feel like God's going to speak to you, and that's how we're going to love you. So I think love, weirdly enough, plays a huge part in this conversation about politics and our nation being a Christian nation or not.
And Christians ought to be involved in politics. I think that people ought to vote and people ought to be able to argue their opinion. You know, when it comes to Roe versus Wade and the whole abortion thing, I'm glad it's gone back to the states. I'm glad that we might have an opportunity to actually vote on that. And I think that many states have and will, you know, want to outlaw abortion. And there will be some that won't. But to me, I'm glad it's not a mandate to where I have to pay my taxes for something I don't agree with.
Yeah, and in turn, that would be the idea of naming us a Christian nation, being that.
Right.
Forcing.
And then we would be mandating something like that. Right. And I know that is a topic, but I'm glad it's going back and we're able to vote on it. And
why are you laughing over here?
Yeah, explain yourself. Because I made a good point and then you laughed at me.
No, you did make a good point, and I was trying to hold it in, but when you first started talking, you were talking about, I'm sorry to ruin this. You were talking about the way we love people today is different than what we did back then. Instantly, my mind went to, well, yeah, I'm not going to take him a bushel of grain or a sheep so they can shear it and make a blanket.
Oh my gosh.
Like, my brain went to the tangible, literal, like, here's how you love on someone type of thing. And so the whole
wear
time,
my wig if you forgot
I was
yours.
thinking about going to somebody's house and taking them a bushel of grain and a sheep.
Oh my gosh.
See what that would do, right?
Yeah.
Who's to say that people don't do that today?
Yeah.
I mean, they might.
So what I took a moment this morning to kind of think through this. So like, okay, let me ask several different questions. So I'm just going to list them. Was the United States founded as a Christian nation? Is the United States a Christian nation like today? Do you think the U.S. Constitution would or would not allow the U.S. to declare the United States a Christian nation? I was trying to put these questions in this poll kind of in a little bit of a different perspective, because how you ask the question is important. Was it founded as a Christian nation? It depends on how you look at it perspective-wise. It definitely, the principles and Christianity flow through our Constitution, and it obviously was deeply influenced. And I think that's why, you know, we have such a special history, right? Is the United States a Christian nation? Again, it probably depends on your perspective. I definitely don't think that it ought to be declared.
Or mandated,
yeah. And because what does that mean? That means that, you know, we're basically legislating our beliefs on people. I think we ought to vote, you know. I think we ought to vote our beliefs and our convictions and not just demand it. That's what we kind of see the other side has done in the past. So I wouldn't want to do the same thing. So
There's just so many different ways you could answer it because of how you process it.
Right.
And it's like,
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
nothing would make me happier than for our country to go in a direction
Right.
where it was obvious that we were living out as a nation Christian moral values.
Right.
But to mandate it and to force it upon people
Yeah.
is different, and so it's like, man, I would love it if I could not have to worry about what I'm going to go to the store and find, or go down the street and see happening in an alley with a drug deal. Like, like all this stuff. Like, I would love it if our nation went that direction, but I don't think that comes from the government mandating it. I think that comes from we as believers reaching people for the gospel.
And it's tricky because, like, that concept of forcing someone into something, like, that is not our angle, but there are multiple occasions in history and just even in daily life when, we've been forced into a situation, and like it has been for our better self, and we come out on the other side of it and everything's good, and we appreciate having been forced into that. That's not the way the gospel works, but I don't know, like, just to play devil's advocate, like, that has worked a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so it's just really interesting because I think we could talk ourselves into it and then talk ourselves right out of it
Yeah.
in the same breath.
Whenever I think of it, though, I just always think of put yourself on the other side of the issue,
Yeah.
because if that's possible, someone else can legislate their own religion.
Their own religion, yeah.
Over, you know what I mean? It's like,
Well, like what we're seeing, people are trying to legislate against religion,
yeah.
and people are trying to do that. I mean, I remember Houston a few years ago, probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, in Houston, Texas, the mayor, I believe it was the mayor, had demanded to see sermon transcripts before pastors would preach them.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember
And
that.
it didn't fly, but the mayor was trying to do that because the mayor was anti-Christian and didn't want certain Christian principles being taught to people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's the opposite side of that coin, right? Like, well, we don't want them legislating against us being able to meet as believers.
And on the flip side of the coin, like, having this idea is not bad. Like, having an idea of being a Christian nation is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But the problem is it can go too far. Yeah. And there's a lot of history to show that putting your religion as your idol becomes a bad thing. Yeah. And so that is something that we got to think about as Christians, to not use this religion thing as a platform to show that this is right and we should do this, but not necessarily because that's so easy to become an idol for us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's making laws or voting people in, it's one of those things that can become really scary at the point of you could really hurt people by doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. If this is a topic you struggle with, I want to encourage you. There's two people that I remember back in seminary for Baptist history, which at first I was like, oh, this is going to be it was really fascinating. Roger Williams and John Leland, two influential people in the lives of those who wrote the Constitution that influenced our founding fathers, that were Baptist preachers, that definitely were the ones that were promoting freedom of religion. And they fought for that for Jews, for Muslims, for Christians. And for some of them, they were Baptists, and they were the minority in a state that was heavily, some other denomination, and their fear was the lack of freedom, right? And so, what brand of Christianity are we going to brand as the,
as the national Christianity?
Yeah, so all interesting stuff. We would love to hear your opinion. Go ahead and put it on there. Feel free to disagree with us. Matter of fact, I know some of you will disagree with us, and that's okay. We'd love to hear from you.